Welcome everyone to Mex Moves, a weekly podcast where we analyze Mexican and U.S. business and Mexican and U.S. relations. How are you, Damien?
Very well, Eduardo.
Great. Good to hear that. This week we have an interesting interview with Ernesto Piedras, who heads a consulting telecommunications firm, to delve on the changes in regulatory matters here in Mexico and how that impacts different businesses and how is the digitalizing of Mexico's culture coming along. We'll also talk about the acquisition made by Western Union of another transfer company. We'll also talk about the impact of Canadian provinces banning or not stocking anymore their stores with U.S. spirited liquors and other beverages on Cuervo, the Mexican tequila maker and distributor of other drinks. Also, we'll review recently announced potential sale of a portion of Banamex to Mexican businessman Fernando Chico Pardo, and the controversy surrounding Adidas and a new type of shoes that allegedly stole, how would you say, not patented, but cultural rights of indigenous people in Oaxaca. So with that, let's start. Damien, let us know about Western Union.
Sure. As many of you may have heard, Western Union earlier this week announced its plan to acquire its competitor, Intermex. According to different press reports, Intermex has about 20% of the remittance flow from US to Mexico. So it's a very significant player, presumably second to Western Union. This comes in a big slowdown in remittances, which we've talked about before. Remittances in June were down 16% year on year, and different factors explain that, as we've discussed. Obviously, tighter U.S. immigration, and in addition, the softer job market in the U.S. are two factors. Also, it was an interesting note by J.P. Morgan that some of the decline, a lot of Central Americans, in fact, the majority of migration over the last couple of years, the vast majority has not been Mexicans going to the US, but Central Americans and South Americans going through Mexico to the US. And in 2024, Mexico was receiving, apparently, a lot of remittances that were going to these Central Americans and South Americans who were still in Mexico. And their relatives in the US were sending money to them. Now that they're not in Mexico, they come back home. That remittance flow has also declined, and that may have contributed to these very sharp declines. So as I mentioned, Western Union they're paying $500 million in cash. The idea, I think, here is to add scale and cut costs, and they have 10,000 agents. Intermex, Western Union has about 40,000, so it's a large number of agents on both sides. Intermex have been going through, for the same reasons that remittances have been declining, they've been reporting poor numbers. Presumably, one of the reasons they accepted this offer, they've withdrawn their 2025 guidance. It is a listed company. Their revenue and earnings have been declining. They only reported about $10 million in free cash flow last year. The idea, based on the conference call that Western Union gave on Monday, is they'll be keeping the different brands. Western Union itself is a multi-brand remittance player. They have Orlandi, Vigo, and others. Intermex has its own brand, and La Nacional. And this comes amidst a big pressure, not only from remittances declining, but the fully digital players are gaining a fair amount of market share and putting downward pressure on remittance pricing, which is great for the Mexicans who are receiving remittances and the Mexican Americans or Latin Americans who are sending remittances. The plan is to have $30 million of cost synergies, cost reductions in the next 2 years. They hope that this will close in 2026. But there's clearly going to be some regulatory scrutiny because they're going to be by far the largest player, and this will lead to some concentration. And maybe they'll have to offload some of the agents and some of the business if in certain regions of the US they're overly dominant. For the Mexican players, so the Electra and Coppel are obviously the two big players in Mexico. They work with Western Union and Intermex, so they don't have material kind of physical network in the US. So you often hear about Western Union having 30% market share and Electra having 40% market share, but there's really double counting that because a lot of those flows are going from Western Union to Electra. I think there's good and bad news. I mean, there'll be more volume and fewer intermediaries to deal with from their perspective, which might be good. But on the other hand, Western Union is going to have a lot bigger bargaining power, which could help them reduce the transaction fees they pay in Mexico. But I think this is going to accelerate the digital shift and give, if this deal is approved, give Western Union and Intermex a big impetus to get workers in the US who want to send money to Mexico or other countries, to go on their app and send directly to the bank accounts and reduce cash. So I think this is, and obviously digital tends to have lower margins, so scale is critical. And if this gives them scale, it can help them sustain their profitability even as you move to a fully or almost fully digital mix. So I think this is about how key scale is when you're going digital, and this will give them that scale.
Yeah, it sounds like a little bit, Damien, like it's the beginning of, I don't know if I could extrapolate that much, but the beginning of a little bit of a consolidation of this industry, because exactly what you just said, the scale will make a big difference. And with crypto coming in as well and trying to take some market share, or other players trying to take some market share, I think Western Union saw the chance and took it and will be a bigger player. I wonder how much the COFECE, or the new regulatory agency, will diminish the size of the scale that Western Union will be able to get out of this transaction. But I think it will be approved in the end because of greater competition in the industry.
Yeah, as they don't have a lot of physical presence in Mexico, and they're dealing with Mexican counterparties like Electra, Coppel, and others. The competition issue will be more in the US, but you might expect the Mexican players to lobby in the US and defend their own interests. But you're right, and I also think because of heightened concerns on compliance and anti-money laundering and compliance costs are probably also going up because as we saw with Intercam and the different issue and Vector. The costs of getting something wrong on the compliance side are like losing your license and basically going out of business. So you need to be able to amortize that investment in compliance over more clients, and scale gives you that opportunity to amortize those costs. So I think digitalization is pushing this. I think the reduction in remittance flows because of migration policy is pushing this, and I think compliance is pushing this, and weak numbers that you've seen especially at Intermex, which made them kind of willing to throw in the towel.
Yeah, it weakened them. Moving on, Damien, to I saw this story on the Wall Street Journal about how Canadian provinces are. Well, some of them have reversed. They were banning their stores from, it was a natural reaction to stop buying U.S. spirited drinks. And the interesting thing is how much this impacted also a Mexican company indirectly. This is how entrenched, or how the world is wired in very complex ways, because it impacted Cuervo, which saw the sales of its spirit drinks in Canada dropped 6.8%. Obviously, it's not the biggest or most important market for that Mexican company, but it does indicate how when you take an action in one country, it could end up hurting something you wouldn't have expected. So the Canadian decision to stop drinking liquor produced in America hurt Cuervo because it did import some liquors to those provinces in Canada. The company has 3 distillers in the U.S. It distills whiskey in Colorado and other drinks, and 2 more in New York. And it has also bottling plants in the U.S., in Colorado and Indiana. So that action by the Canadians hurt Cuervo, which is the name it's Beckel in the stock exchange, and has hurt its earnings. Obviously, Canada is not the biggest of all markets.
Yeah, I think overall, Beckley obviously much more dependent on tequila and much more dependent on the US market, as you said, and they have a competitive advantage now versus the Europeans, which are very strong in spirits, especially in Scottish whiskey, because the UK will be paying 10% tariffs, or is paying 10% tariffs, and the EU is paying 15% tariffs, and as tequila is USMCA compliant, that it won't be paying any tariffs to tequila. Obviously, it has to be distilled here in Mexico, and that's more than 2/3 of their business. So while the Canadian business is of concern, clearly any lost sales is bad news. I think that there's a general kind of relief, especially back in February when there were sort of concerns that Trump would put heavy tariffs on Mexico, which he threatened to do for a few days. The company is relatively well positioned.
Right. And then we had this hidden, a little bit like a hidden news in a Bloomberg story that Fernando Chico Pardo might be the one who will control Banamex when it does its IPO by acquiring a 20% stake in the bank. For those who don't know, Fernando Chico Pardo is one of Mexico's best-known businessmen. He controls Grupo Aeroportuario del Sureste, one of the 3 privately owned airport companies in Mexico. He has a very important fund called Promecap. He's a very shrewd businessman who carved his teeth with Carlos Slim when they were partners in Grupo Financiero en Bolsa. Now, his profile will probably even grow if this news is confirmed later on that he will be managing Banamex. What do you make out of this, Damian? I think it's big news. He's a Mexican. For that matter, he complies with the government's I don't know if imposition, but suggestion that the bank will be kept or will be returned to Mexican hands. He has some experience in financial institutions when he was at Inbursa, and he has obviously placed secades and other instruments in the Mexican stock market. I think it's a very interesting development.
Yeah, I think it will make it a lot easier for a city to offload its stake if there's a Mexican partner, whether it's Fernando Chico, as Bloomberg reported, or someone else. First of all, it makes the sell in the IPO smaller, because if Banamex is worth, just for the sake of argument, 1 times book value, that's a $8 billion, $7 to $8 billion market cap. There's no way you can sell even half of that in an IPO right now in Mexico. Maybe a quarter or $2-3 billion IPO would be, but probably as much as the market could absorb. So you need to, if Banamex wants to go below 50%, if Citi wants to go below 50%, then the best way to do that would be to sell 2025 to a Mexican operator, 2025 in an IPO, and then put its, let's say, 49% that remains in a vehicle that could then be kind of sold over time. and the board would no longer, even though would no longer be controlled by Citi, and it would be one less thing for them to worry about. And Fernando Chico has a good reputation both as an operator when he was at Imbursa and now at Azur. I think he has good relationships in the Mexican government. He now is completely independent, but he spent probably 20, 30 years working under Carlos Slim and when he was at Imbursa, and then went independent and has done very well through Azur and through Promacap, which is his sort of family office private equity vehicle that's made different investments, generally speaking, quite successful across tourism, across lending, high interest rate lending to sort of small enterprises, medium-sized enterprises, other financial institutions, and obviously the airport operator. So I think it's an interesting opportunity for Citi. Now, they still have to deal with the reality that the Citi is it is a lot less profitable than other banks, and it's Banamex is a lot less profitable than other sort of similar sized banks. So in the first half of the year, operating expenses were about 80% of total revenues. So that's a massive expense ratio. BBVA, which is the leader, is at half that. So this clearly reflects two different issues. One, that their revenues aren't high enough, and secondly, that their costs are too high. So a new manager will have to grow the business and cut the costs. And someone like Chico Pardo is probably in a reasonably good position to do that. But he's not gonna pay up for a bank that's got an expense ratio that high. Now, on the other hand, contrary to what some people expected, in the first half of the year, Banamex has been growing its loan portfolio in 2025 above the system, pretty much in every segment except for credit cards. So it is growing, and also deposits are growing. So now that it's been separated from Citi and has fully independent management, except at the board level, the bank is picking up market share. And when it was part of Citi, and it was one bank, as you know, in December they spun off the sort of Citi part of the business, which was mainly large company loans. It had been steadily losing market share. So you do see a kind of different Banamex taking place and benefiting from this, even though they still have to deal with their expenses. Now, I would guess, I don't have access to the data, that a lot of the expenses are related to the spin-off and compliance and legal costs, and that over time, as this spin-off becomes fully operational, you'll get to see a reduction in cost. Banamex has basically had to kind of recreate a lot of structures that previously were with Citi. Also, it's pretty under-leveraged versus its big peers, so it can it can increase its loans without increasing its equity, and that would obviously also bring down the expense ratio, as the increased loans would raise revenues without raising costs to the same extent. So there's, I think, a big opportunity to turn this thing around. The numbers in the first half are quite encouraging, and if they re-leverage and cut costs, they can benefit from what is still, especially high-end Mexico, a very good brand.
Do you fear that the structure? I mean, Fernando would probably ask to have certain type of shares that give him control of the bank if he invests in it, or with the 20%, he'll feel confident that he can control the bank on its own without any specially issued type of shares.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think there's different ways you could control a bank or any public company without having 50%. You can do it through special voting shares, although the securities law in Mexico has made that a bit more complex if you're doing it from scratch, rather than having a sort of legacy position that you're inheriting. But you can have bylaws that give you basically sort of poison pills that make it very difficult for someone else to take control of the company, and you could control the board through that. So Banorte, the Banorte family the Hanks and the Hank Gonzalez's don't have anything like 50% of Banorte, but they still control the bank. They don't technically have double voting shares, but they control the board, and that's, so far at least, that's been enough.
All right. Moving on, you were telling me also about a fintech that it's generating some news.
Yeah, Aviva. We talked about this before. We had one of their executives on the podcast, Sarah Hayden. It's a small amount, but I thought it was interesting to mention. They're a microcredit agency, and they raised $1.5 million in venture debt from BID Lab, the venture capital arm of the Inter-American Development Bank. And this was reported as BID's first ever venture debt operation in Latin America. And Aviva is kind of opposite to a lot of other fintechs. They have 70, or perhaps more now, but the last time I read, they had 70 physical kiosks, often in small towns in front of sort of Walmarts or other big retail outlets, and they give out loans from these kiosks. But then the loan origination decision is very much AI driven. They're looking at the data you provide, whether you're a good credit or not. The loans are mostly to women, about 70%, average about 6,000 pesos, pretty short term, from 8 weeks to 6 months. And I think they say that the credit approval takes under 10 minutes. And they've had some decent venture capital backing from Ignia, Wallif, 500 Global, amongst others, that seem to be doing really reasonably well. On the fintech, Eduardo, there was also a story in Bloomberg over the week about Story, which, like Aviva, is very much focused on the bottom end, the middle and the bottom end of the economic period in Mexico. It's a credit card fintech. They interviewed Bin Chen, who's the CEO and co-founder, and he said that they're looking to raise to do an IPO maybe at the end of 2026, and that their numbers are fast improving, including tax credits. They even made a profit in the first half of this year. They compete obviously with Nu, which is more higher, middle and higher end on the credit card side. They compete with Klar, and they also compete with Plata, as well as with all the incumbent banks and their credit cards. So, as we talked about before, the credit card business in Mexico is where a lot of the fintech activity is taking place. There's probably too many, and based on the CMBV data, the non-performing loans plus write-offs are still in the sort of mid-20s, which is probably too high for them to be sustainably profitable. But there's encouraging signs that the numbers are finally beginning to improve. But although my guess is that not all of these credit card fintechs will survive as independent entities, and you may see some consolidation or M&A in the sector before long.
Yeah, and last but not least, we have this controversy surrounding Adidas and its latest tennis shoe or huarache shoe, or I don't know how to call it, but the company has been really pointed at by the Mexican authorities because they feel that this new design, it's a steal from an indigenous town in Oaxaca that produces huaraches, this very famous type of sandals. They asked for, I think they filed a lawsuit, and they've asked for Adidas to apologize. The company has apologized. The designer of the new shoes has apologized, and it seems like they are in talks to have some sort of compensation to the community that created the design and over which this new shoe is based upon. And even the designer did say that his idea came from that town, and that he was trying more than anything to raise the profile or highlight what they've done. But it obviously didn't go well with the family, the town, the state, and the Mexican government. Not the first time that a foreign company has been involved in such such controversy, but this one is the latest.
Yeah, I mean, Adidas has had quite a lot of scandals on its shoes. Do you remember the Kanye West, or Years, I guess it's called? They took a $1.3 billion revenue loss, and when they cancelled the Yeezy partnership. So this is tiny compared to that, but it's they seem to have got themselves in a bit of a mess on a fairly consistent basis. And I was reading in white paper in the Substack, how well the sort of competitor to Nike and Adidas is doing, and it seems that Adidas is losing a bit of its mojo, and this is sort of the latest problem they're facing. It's it's an easy win for Shane Byrne. She sort of wraps herself up in the Mexican indigenous flag. She takes on a global multinational, a German one in this case, and everyone sort of applauds her. I think she's sort of taking a leaf from AMLO's book, and while at the same time she's handing over 26 drug gang criminals to the US, and allegedly letting US planes fly in Mexican airspace in Valle de Bravo. It's quite a convenient thing for her to be able to take the nationalist flag, while at the same time she's having to make a lot of concessions to the US on different issues.
Without a doubt, this one distracts a little bit the attention from the other issues, which are very serious and very worrisome, and where she's getting a lot of pressure from the states to act upon. And so maybe this is an easy win for her versus the other one, which is she's put herself also against the wall by becoming nationalist in terms of territorial integrity, which is comprehensible. Nobody wants another country interfering in your own affairs inside your territory. But and I think they've handled it well. They've received the apologies from Adidas and the designer, and they'll probably get some compensation out of it. Not as large as the billions of dollars that Adidas lost with Kanye West, but some sort of money will flow to that community in Oaxaca. So I think it works well for her in that sense, and for Mexico.
Yeah, well, let's hope Oaxacans get lots of money from Adidas, and let's hope that the shoe sells well. Maybe they'll pay them a royalty.
It's a pretty nice design, I gotta say. I mean, the huaraches originally, the original huaraches are very nice. Now, if you add the technology of a soft sole and all these things that Adidas brings to the market, it looks comfortable, to be honest. We'll see. Let's move on to our interview, if you don't mind, Damien.
Sounds good.
This week, Ernesto Piedras, one of Mexico's leading consultants on all things digital and telecom. Welcome, Ernesto. He heads the Competitive Intelligence Unit, better known as the CU, a firm that not only advises major players in the telecom and digital industries, but also gathers an impressive volume of data that is key to identifying trends, analyzing developments, and shaping policy discussions in the sector. Like me, Ernesto is an economist trained at the Instituto Tecnológico Autónomo de México, the famous ITAM, and he also pursued graduate studies at the London School of Economics. In addition to his consulting work, Ernesto has taught and coordinated graduate-level courses in telecommunications markets and public policy. He also participates and contributes to several media outlets in Mexico and abroad. Ernesto, welcome to Mex Moves. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you very much, Eduardo. I'm very pleased to be here, and very pleased also. This is a very fascinating sector, especially in countries like Mexico, of course, with so much work to do in both market and regulatory arenas, as you've mentioned. And yes, indeed, we're in a transition period here in Mexico, both I insist in regulatory terms, in market terms, macroeconomic terms as well. And we have many figures. Well, as you mentioned, the Competitive Intelligence Unit has been around for a quarter of a century, developing facts and figures, and we're at the turn of a phase here in Mexico. The Instituto Federal de Telecomunications is about to disappear in Mexico, giving space to a new agency here. So we'll see what comes from the regulatory and government side of the story. The companies, the private sector is also changing a lot. Telefonica is leaving the arena. AT&T is working hard. We have mobile operators pushing hard. So as I mentioned in the beginning, this is always, every single day, a fascinating sector here. And digital transformation is here, but we need more and faster here for people, families, companies, and definitely for the government as well, Eduardo.
Thank you, Ernesto. Let me then start. You already gave us an overall picture of the status. Are you, in that sense, worried of the disappearance of the autonomous regulatory agency that for the last 12 years had regulated the sector, the Federal Telecommunications Institute, the IFT? What's your concern of its disappearance, as you mentioned?
I definitely agree with you. I'm worried about it because I agree that we were on a position of the need of a change. If we look back to the privatization of the Telmex, the government monopoly, this privatization came in 1990. Then we have the COFETEL, the first shape of the regulatory body. Then the telecom reform 10 years ago, which gave turn to the Instituto Federal de Telecomunicaciones. And that meant an evolution where Mexico passed from being one of the most expensive and concentrated markets and countries in the world, definitely the most expensive in the OECD, to become one competitive in tariffs and prices terms in the world, and definitely also in the OECD sphere. And it was a good time for a shake, for a new phase in regulatory terms, but not necessarily this way by disappearing the IFT, the Instituto Federal de Telecomunicaciones, because at this point we still don't know where we're going in terms of a new law, in terms of the new institutional shape that we're going to have, in terms of the new competitive conditions that we're going to have. So we could have new regulatory terms, but at this point in August 2025, we still are not sure where we're heading to. So and this means, in economic terms, that the companies are not investing what we need to have in this sector, and the terms of competition are not clear still. We don't know if the main competitor or the main operator, which is América Móvil, Telmex, Telcel, which holds 2/3 of the market, which is too much, which is a lot, is going to get forced to let go this part of the sector to have more balanced competitive conditions in the sector, and what we call real competition, which is still far from being in place here in Mexico. So these are not good conditions, and we're part of a trade agreement still in North America, along with the USA and Canada, and this is part of the agreement that we'll still have, hopefully we'll continue to have here in North America, and we need more of this, not less of this. for the welfare of the country and for the digital transformation and for the operation of the whole society, education, production, export, import, etc. So we needed more, not less, and not more uncertainty, which is what we're receiving now at this stage in 2025. So regulation, new law, new institution, but still uncertain is what we're having at this point, and that is not what we need from this central and vital sector for the whole society.
Is it possible that this mention in the non-tariff barriers document that the U.S. government produced about the high price of the spectrum in Mexico infringe the possibilities of renegotiating the USMCA?
I don't think that's going to be central because, and this is not an excuse, these very high prices have been there for quite a long time, ever since the agreement was established decades ago from the 1990s. So one argument that has been put on the table by the Mexican government, not only government, several different governments, has been those are the conditions that has been there forever. One of the main and very loud voices who have been raised have been by the AT&T boys by saying, hey, this is too expensive. Even AT&T have delivered back part of their spectrum, and the government and the regulatory body, the IFT, has said, hey, come on, you came to this market at these prices of this spectrum. So that's one of the answers. That is not an excuse, I must agree. I am on the side of the convenience and need of a revision of these prices to take and go to international standards, but I don't think that could be a crucial or central point of negotiations. Otherwise, what could be central could be real competitive conditions. Why do you continue to have a player who holds 2/3 of the market in terms of lines, for instance, in the mobile market, and why that player, América Móvil, continues to hold almost 3/4 of the market in terms of revenues. And if we go to margins, that player continues to hold 4/5 of margin. So that's a very unbalanced market. There's no way you can truly compete with those numbers. That's not normal in any market in the world, in any sector.
So in that sense, are you a little bit optimistic that the U.S. government might push Mexico in the right way for a more level playing field in its telecommunications regulatory framework? I know you said at the beginning that there's a lot of uncertainty, but could it help clear that uncertainty and give the tools for the regulators to really make a very competitive market here?
I'm moderately optimistic and sadly also optimistic that some help could come from abroad. If the regulatory body and even the government has for a long time been captured by the main player here in Mexico, this help from abroad could come for good terms to push for effective, competitive, playing level field here in Mexico, which is very worrying and sad to say.
Yeah, because he has to be an external actor, not the internal players or the government's own interest in the sector to be promoted the way it should be, right?
Because we've had several governments from several parties, and they seem always have been captured by the main player here in Mexico, América Móvil. So it seems that we need to have help from abroad, either the Unión Internacional de Telecomunicaciones or external agreements or external governments to say, come on, get real and have real competition here in Mexico.
What's your take, changing the topic a little bit, Ernesto, about CFE as an operator and a provider of bandwidth for the virtual mobile networks like the one Walmart has put out and others?
Well, this is a very novelty model which has produced, well, let's put it different. It's Altan, the supplier of capacity, and what they have done to the mobile virtual operators, the MVNOs, has been very successful. Now they account for 22 or 23 million, the whole mobile virtual network operators, not all of them running on Altan, some others on Telcel and some others on AT&T. But they seem to be successful. I insist, not all of them on Altan. Some of them, like Virgin, they run on Telefonica even, and some others on Telcel, like Freedom Pop. And the customers seem to be liking these services. I would put aside the case of CFE, which is still not really operating still. I don't seem, and you said in the beginning, we come from a formation as economists that we are, that we don't like players from the government. I personally, as an economist myself, don't like governments trying to play as entrepreneurs. I like governments who perform as governments. So I would wait and see until the government deliver some results. And even CFE is a monopoly here in Mexico, and we don't have the best electrical system in the world. So let's wait and see what they do in telecommunications. They could have done much more beforehand. For example, they have towers all over, electrical towers all over the country, where they could have had antennas to cover mobility services, and they have never agreed to do so. So we could have coverage all over the country ever since 20, 25 years ago, and they haven't agreed. So, or they could have allowed the private companies to put their antennas in those high and medium tension antennas all over the country, and they have never agreed to do so. So electricity is not telecommunications. Even though both of them are infrastructures, they work very differently. And so let's see what becomes of this marriage between electricity and telecommunications. We've worked for CFE several years ago, and we see some reluctancy from CFE to enter the telecom, and now let's see if they mature this idea. So I don't see it very easily from these electric guys to enter the bits and bytes world nowadays. So, but it's an agreement taken from the Presidency of the Republic. So that's why I insisted, although I put on the one side the MVNOs, which are being very successful, 23 million MVNOs, or maybe more, 25 or as a total, and growing very fast, has been the main dynamism in the past 3 to 4 years, more than the rest of the mobility sector. And the CFE, it's still an illusion to see what happens. So, and I don't like a lot these government monopolies. So, and one more fact is very important: portability. In the past year and a half or two, consumers have taken the long life number, mobile number, to their MVNO. Not all the time, but in many quarters. So they have said, my long life mobile number, I'll take it to an MVNO, which is very strange. So they've tried their MVNO, they've liked it, and they bring their long life number to their MVNO. And that's a decision taken by the consumer. So it's not, as many people say, SIM that someone gave them for free and they just use it for a few days and get rid of it. The consumers are liking this coverage, these prices, and this quality. So, as I mentioned in the beginning, this is a sector which is changing a lot from both sides, the supply side of the story, but also on the demand side of the story of the consumer.
Has it changed the landscape, or it's just the very beginning of a shift? What's your sense?
It's changing a lot. As you can see, when we talk about 25 million lines in a matter of 4 years, that's a lot from the MVNOs. That's why I perceive that the preponderant player is worried, not only in terms of services, but there's another part of the story that we haven't mentioned, but it's the selling of smartphones. The preponderant used to have also a, let me call it, almost monopoly about selling smartphones. And now the customer, the consumer is going online and is going to supermarkets to buy their smartphones or tablets or laptops. And they are complaining a lot, the preponderant players, and they are launching this campaign that they call gray market. And I don't agree on calling it gray market. Gray, you might imply that is close to a black market, and it is not. It's an alternative market. You may go online and buy your device in, I'll mention brands. I'm not publicizing any one. You may buy Samsung or Apple or whatever, not only in the website of Telcel. You may go to the website of the own brand. And that's what the preponderant don't like, that you go to some other place and save 10%, 15%. And that's what they don't like about these other players to do. So they are reacting as a monopoly. That's a typical monopolistic reaction from the preponderant. So that's why they are launching these stories like, why do you go somewhere else if you should come just to buy in my Telcel store? Because that's what you've done for 25 years ago. So I insist, that's fascinating about this sector, that now we're pushing for more, better and effective competition.
That's great to hear that it's they're really producing an earthquake in a little way in the industry. What can you tell us more about how Mexicans are using the digital world, Ernesto? I know you keep track of streaming, you keep track of a lot of digitalized services. What can you tell us how Mexico has evolved?
I like it very much that you mentioned it in plural terms, because you said Mexicans. You didn't say Mexico, and I agree very much, because we've written a lot about the many Mexicos there are. In the 1960s, the literature used to mention the two Mexicos. Now, in some analysis, we've mentioned the 3 or 4 digital Mexicos we have. And during the pandemic, there was a digital push here in Mexico. We advanced at least 5 or 6 years in digital terms. The homes gained digital speed, digital access. We advanced a lot, but we continue to identify 3 or 4 Mexicos. And you may mention this in regional terms. You have the north, which is very well advanced, the center, part of the center of Mexico, which is very well covered, very high speed in digital terms, but you have the sureste, which is lagged behind, and the center north, which is medium advanced. And we have some numbers for this. Whoever wants to enter to www.ciu.com can download these studies. You will receive them regularly. And we have these maps and these indices where we measure the states and the cities and how we have these differences. We have them for the states, we have them for sectors of the economies, we have them for ages, and we don't have one Mexico. We have 3 or 4 digital Mexicos, and that is a problem because now the Mexican Constitution, well, now and ever since 10 years ago, talks about the right of digital access, and someone is failing to fulfill this constitutional right. We don't have fulfilled this constitutional right. Some of us have this right fulfilled, but many Mexicans not. When the pandemic came, 33 million students of public schools didn't have classes because the public schools didn't have this coverage. Private students in private schools, most of them did. So the country suffered this additional gap in digital terms. So we have to work to have this one Mexico, not 3 Mexicos in digital terms. I can tell you, for instance, in terms of the size of the economic units of enterprises, the big companies, the big economic units, 93.1% of them, the big economic units, have very well penetrations of services. Medium, which are from 51 to 250 workers, have 90.1% of good penetration. Small, which run from 11 to 50 employees, in 82.1% of penetration of digital services. But when you go to micro companies, which are virtually 92% of them in Mexico, only 23.5% are with account with coverage and equipment in this company. So most of them, more than 9 out of 10, have seen this digital transformation. So we have this white and black country in terms of this digital transformation. Homes are much better balanced. Generations, we all have these adoptions in general, with some differences, of course, but in general, I can tell you, for instance, we are 133.3 persons living in Mexico, and we account for 155 smartphones and lines here in Mexico. So there's more lines and devices than people in Mexico, 120% of penetration. So people, we are much better and equipped than companies. And if we finally talk about the government is in technicolor. We have more e-citizen, el e-ciudadano, than the e-government. The e-ciudadano is much ahead than the e-government. So we have this black and white country still.
Fascinating, Ernesto. Anything we left out that you might want to add?
I would say that we continue to have a need, and this is going to sound a bit ancient still. We continue to need something that was fashionable 20 years ago, but some sort of e-plan. not to tell the society and the government and the private sector what to do, but still to get coordinated, because we continue to have a private sector to seem to go to one side, the society to another one, and we still need to have much better coordination. I will tell you, we are not a country 5G. If we take the average of the mobile generation, instead of being 5G, our average is 3.6G. So it's incredible that in 2025, we are not still even 4G when we are on the verge of 6G, discussing 6G in Asia, in continental Europe, in the UK, in the rest of North America, and we continue to have 3G. If you drive around Mexico City, many times you move from 3 to 4G, rarely to 5G in Mexico City. So we need to get better coordinated, and as I mentioned before, to really coordinate to get everyone on this boat, to get, and not to get first and second and third digital class citizens and companies and sectors. So we need a lot of work to do. The technology is there. We all want 5G. We all want to be there, as our constitution says. The companies want to sell their services and devices. We want to use more and better services. Now we study, we work, we romance digitally. So let's go on the same boat together. So it's just a matter of get better and faster coordination, Eduardo.
That's a great ending, Ernesto. There's a lot of work to do from the government to coordinate what you just said, so that we have a country that is fully digitalized at a technological level that the country deserves. So on that note, thank you, Ernesto, for participating in Mex Moves. It's been quite interesting, and I hope we can continue talking about the development of Mexico's telecom and digital world.
Always my pleasure, Eduardo, with you and our audience. Greetings to everyone.
Thank you, Ernesto. Well, thanks everyone for listening to this weekly podcast, Mex Moves. Don't forget to subscribe, and we hope we have you on board next week as well.